Hey everyone, Sushi here, and today we're going to be talking about a movie that kind of blew up recently. I first found out about Skinamarink through a TikTok that called the film the most unsettling horror movie ever, and after watching it, I can certainly say, it's debatable. I just want to start off by saying I think horror as a genre has been somewhat disappointing as of late. Especially with big franchises, it just feels like we've seen everything there is to see, or at least with blockbuster films like Halloween. I mean, Halloween used to have this strong image and the last two films just completely destroyed it. And the horror movies I liked recently, I didn't like because they scared me. I liked them because they were just overall entertaining films with good stories. And I know the argument about cheap jump scares have been made a million times, but it's true. I think that's one of the main reasons horror is kind of dying. I mean, if you take a movie with a somewhat dark plot and add a few jump scares in there, it might be classified as a horror movie, but it's not really scary. It's gotten to a point where the only horror that scares me nowadays is YouTube horror, with amazing series like Gemini Home Entertainment, Local 58, and my personal favorite, Mandela Catalog. So how are these YouTube creators doing a better job than Hollywood films with massive budgets? And I think the answer to that question is these series aren't playing things safe into tradition, they branch out and try new things. They don't just focus on jump scares for their horror, it's almost entirely psychological. And by far, psychological horror is the best thing in... The psychological horror in Skinamarink is absolutely haunting. This is one of the only movies that caused me to vocally say out loud, nah, because of what was on screen, and caused my hands to be soaked in sweat. Because this is a spoiler-free part of this video, I'm only going to be giving very basic plot details and only show footage from the first 10 minutes of the movie. Skinamarink is a movie about two kids being stuck in a house and some strange stuff starts to happen. And yes, that is all I'm going to give you for the spoiler-free section because I think the real horror is in the specifics of this movie. This movie is extremely eerie, up there with some of the most eerie pieces of media I've consumed. Although the pacing of this film is a huge issue, the best parts of this are extremely hard to watch, and I mean that in the best way possible. Not to mention the editing and the sound effects. Albeit very simple, they're examples of psychological horror at its peak. That being said, by far the biggest problem with this movie is the plot. This is up there with some of the most confusing movies I've ever seen, and the plot is just extremely messy and all over the place. I don't even think anyone online understands this movie, including me, and for a horror movie, that's definitely a negative. And I do understand that one of the main reasons psychological horror is so scary is because you don't fully understand the threat or its capabilities or goals, but it just doesn't work here. For an example, we're going to be taking a look at the Mandela Catalog, a series very similar to this movie. Each video is pretty confusing on its own, but once you piece them all together, it's a part of a bigger picture. Like in the video Mandela Catalog Volume 1, you learn about these shape-shifting creatures known as alternates who have, keyword here, unknown capabilities, and who have been known to mess with video recordings and also drive people to commit suicide. It's also scary because you don't know what you're dealing with. Then if you watch Overthrown, another video in the series, it's explained that these alternates have been around since Adam and Eve, and I think it's implied that God was even overtaken by one. This is why Mandela Catalog is not only extremely unsettling, but it's also interesting story-wise. The threat in the story is extremely mysterious and dangerous, yet it feels possible to learn about them and get a better understanding for their origin. Even if their backstory and capabilities aren't fully explored in the series, there's still a reason why they exist. If Skinamarink just focused a bit more on the origin and the capabilities of this threat, I think this film would have been a lot better. Because even after viewing the film, I don't even know if I could half-decently describe the threat. So did Skinamarink live up to that hype? Personally, I'd say no. However, it's not Skinamarink's fault. TikTok really overhyped this movie. The TikToks around this movie calling it the scariest movie in the world should have noted how confusing it is. And I think that's a huge part of why the ratings for this movie are so low. I feel like most of the people on TikTok who found out about this movie misunderstood that it had a very small team behind it and it'd be very confusing, and that just led them to rate 1 star on all these platforms to review movies on. In conclusion, Skinamarink has one of the most unsettling atmospheres of any movie I've ever seen, but almost embarrassingly fails to assemble a cohesive plot and leaves the viewer left a little disappointed. And that's why I rate Skinamarink a low...
This is the spoiler section. Please click off the video now if you don't want any spoilers. Thank you.
For the spoilers section, I'd like to start off with some of the moments I really enjoyed. I absolutely love the usage of subtitles in this movie. I might just be getting this from my love for Mandela Catalog, but every time a subtitle was on the screen, my heart filled with dread. It just perfectly worked with the film grain and the overall messy quality of this movie. It also makes the thread of this film infinitely more interesting. And the bed scene is just so hard to watch, and I mean that in the best way possible. I love that it doesn't play on typical horror movie tropes. I was so ready for a jump scare, but the fact that it never came just makes it even more scary. Also, this scene perfectly utilizes the point of view of a small child. Even watching this, it just feels like I'm in a fever dream, or more fever nightmare. It just feels so incredibly realistic. And another scene that gave me this exact same feeling is when the mom disappeared, which was also on the bed. It happens so slow, but it's just so heartbreaking and dreadful watching someone slowly fade into the film grain. It's just done in such a good way that makes it feel real. It really makes you sympathize with the kids. And speaking of sympathizing with the kids, the knife scene might be my favorite scene in this movie. I know I've used the word dread like 6 times now, but there's no other word to describe this scene. It just had a perfect mixture of horror and sadness. This is probably the saddest part in the entire movie, yet it was impossible for me to take my eyes off the screen. Another thing I thought was really cool was the Lego hallway scene. I really wish the movie did this more. For indescribable reasons, it's just so eerie looking at a ton of Legos at the end of an infinitely long hallway. It really reminds me of Dreamcore, or whatever you want to call it. Not only is it very horrifying, but it's also very stylish. But remember, I did give this film a 6 out of 10, so let's dive into some of the things I thought the film could have done better. First off, I want to talk about how off-putting the first jump scare of this movie is. This movie would have been way better without it, and it just feels like a middle finger for the style this movie's trying to go for. I don't need cheap fake jump scares in a film that focuses on psychological horror. And one of the things I noticed almost instantly was the voice acting. I know good child voice actors are extremely hard to come by, but these kids just don't really act like kids. I mean, if you want to play devil's advocate, you could say the kids are so quiet and sheltered because the family dynamic that's going on, but I feel like that's kind of pushing it. The way these kids talk just feel very unrealistic, almost as if they have no life in them. And that would work towards the end of the film, but definitely not through the film entirely. And another thing that took me out of the moment is the scene where the kids go to turn the light back on. It's such a small thing, but the light switch sound effect is the exact same every time, and it even cuts off at one point. Like, how hard is it to just get another light switch sound effect? Also, you have the loophole of the 911 call. I'm not 100% calling it a loophole, because I'm sure you could probably bullshit some explanation in there, but it just feels like it should have been followed up upon. Like, it just kind of ends out of nowhere. Why not have a scene where the kid is on the phone with the operator, but the operator slowly fades to static? Or maybe the police are having a hard time finding them because they're not actually in the real house. I don't know, I'm just kind of spitballing ideas at this point, but it just feels like there's a lot of missed potential here. And speaking of missed potential, another scene that I thought could have been way better was the house scene. That scene was so confusing to me at first. I thought the house was a nightlight. This scene could have been so much better if you just started at a window peeking into a room we know about, and just slowly panned out to show us where the house is. Another thing I think the film could have really expanded on was the reappearing and disappearing objects. I thought the scene with the doorway disappearing and reappearing was very unsettling. And then the only other time this really happens in the film was with the toilet. I don't know how to take that, it's almost comically bad. Again, I hate to spitball ideas, but what if there was a doorway or an attic that appeared and you saw a face in it? That would kind of give you an explanation of maybe where these monsters are coming from. There's just so many ways that psychological horror could have been utilized to tell this story better. And overall, it just feels like they could have done a lot more. And by far my biggest issue with this movie is the amount of dead air. Look, I'm okay with looking down a scary hallway or a dark room where nothing is really happening, but it's kind of just a momentum killer when all I see is film grain and nothing else. I know those moments are there just to make the next scare more terrifying, but it just doesn't really work here. Looking down a dark hallway or looking into a scary room and hearing a loud noise is a hell of a lot scarier than looking to the corner of a wall and hearing one. And for a movie that's only an hour and 30 minutes, there really shouldn't be any dead air. I can totally see why some people might call this movie 20 minutes of dead air, followed by an eerie scene, just looped over and over again. However, I really do think it's a bit deeper than that. Maybe it's just my love for analog horror with series like Mandela Catalog, but it just did an amazing job at unsettling me. And to wrap things up, I just want to say that even though there's a lot wrong with this film, I think it's a fantastic step in the right direction for horror as a genre. We really need more movies like this, as long as they can develop a cohesive story that's interesting. And that's pretty much all I have to say about Skinamarink. Did you love the movie? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and hopefully you can consider liking and subscribing. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm Sushi Gold, and I hope you all have a fantastic day.